Hello and welcome back to Memories of a Musician. A great show for you tonight. This show features a good friend, colleague, and a great orchestral musician, Paul Silver. When the pandemic hit, I decided to fulfill a bucket list item. It was my only item on my bucket list was to write my first symphony. And so I went to work on that symphony, and during the pandemic, took about between 6 and 7 weeks to compose a 4-movement symphony. Now I had it done. I had it recorded via samples in my studio. However, looking at the score and the parts, I really needed someone to edit the printed scores and parts. So I had met Paul Silver about 11 years ago. We have a mutual friends in Marianne and Ken Kovac, and they were getting married, and Paul asked Paul and Linda, Paul's wife Linda, to play for their wedding, and then put together a string quartet. And they asked me to play piano on a few things, and Marianne's daughter Gina sang a few things. And so we had, in fact, I think Ken's son also played guitar and sang something at the wedding. So we had a nice group of musicians, and I got to meet the Silvers, and went to the reception. We actually sat at the same table. We got to talk, and I got to meet Paul. And so sometime after that, of course, when this all came up, I knew that Paul had retired from the Pittsburgh Symphony in 2019, and I asked him if he would be interested in editing my symphony, and he said he would, which I was thrilled because he's such a great orchestral musician with tons and tons of experience, especially reading this kind of music. So we went to work together, and it took us almost 3 years to complete the editing of the score and the parts for my symphony, which is about a 38-minute piece, 4 movements. So what I'm going to do for you today is, I'm going to take one of these sessions, and I'm actually going to take the whole session and play the symphony and explain it, talk about the genesis, etc. But today, I took a little excerpt of each of the movements, and I'm going to play it. It's totally about 7 minutes, and you're going to see, as it's playing, you're going to see different pieces of music that are relevant to that particular spot in the recording. And you can see, follow most cases, they're parts, the individual parts. In some cases, the full score. And so I want to play this for you. Before I do this, I have one picture that I want to share with you. And this picture was taken this past Monday evening. And of course, that's Paul Silver. In the middle is a guy named Gerald Unger. Jerry Unger is also a retired member of the Pittsburgh Symphony. He was a percussionist with the Pittsburgh Symphony for 30 plus years. And of course, Paul was, I believe, 38 years with the Pittsburgh Symphony. And so, of course, these two guys know each other quite well. And Jerry, I've been friends with Jerry because he lives here in Naples, where I live. And we, when I was writing the symphony, and this is before I got Paul involved, when I was writing, I sat down with Jerry and I asked him a lot of questions about a symphonic percussion section and the role and how they did things. And I had a lot of questions in which he helped me through. And then even after I did the score, he even made some suggestions to me and things. So he was very helpful with me too with this symphony, writing the symphony, as Paul was. And so I invited Jerry over for dinner. My wife and I invited, so we had Jerry and Kathy, his wife Kathy. And by the way, Jerry and Kathy, I think they've been married for 62 years. So they're enjoying their retirement very well here in Naples, Florida. And Paul and Linda, of course, are visiting us. And so we had a nice dinner on Monday evening, and we took this picture in my backyard there. So it was so nice to have these guys and just to hear them talk and discuss their years in the symphony and the music and the players, the different players and the different conductors. For instance, Paul worked under 4 different conductors with Pittsburgh Symphony, and I'm sure Jerry did as well, maybe even more different. But anyhow, I wanted to share that picture with you. So the next thing I want to do is I want to play this little excerpt of my Symphony Number 1, and we're going to put this up for you right now. have DeSalvo's Symphony Number 1 excerpts. And in fact, if you want to see or hear the entire symphony, for one thing, you can download the score on my website, vitodesalvo.com, or you could go to my YouTube channel and you can listen to the symphony and follow the entire score on YouTube. It's together, the score and the recording, if you're interested in listening to it at that time. So that's the symphony and an intense amount of work. Paul and I probably spent hundreds. I can't tell you how many hours we spent together, both face to face and on the phone, and then each of us doing our part to get everything in order. And that score and a set of parts is as good as it can be, I think, to present now. We're just about ready to find an orchestra that would like to premiere the symphony. So before I bring Paul onto the program, I know you're anxious to see and meet him and hear his story and his journey in his musical career. I'm going to read just a little background for you. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, violist Paul Silver holds a Bachelor of Music degree and a Performer's Certificate from the Eastman School of Music. He also holds a Master of Music degree from the Cleveland Institute of Music. His teachers include Robert Vernon, Francis Tercy, Heidi Castleman, and Edward Ormond. Paul joined the viola section of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra in 1981, where he worked under four of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra's music directors, Andre Previn, Lauren Mizell, Maris Janssens, and Manfred Honeck, before retiring in 2019. Mr. Silver has been a participant in the Aspen and Casals music festivals and has performed as a chamber musician in Beijing, Hong Kong, Moscow, and throughout the United States, as well as numerous concerts in the Pittsburgh area. As a viola soloist, he has performed with the Westmoreland and Butler Symphony Orchestras. Paul has also served on the adjunct music faculties of the University of Pittsburgh, Duquesne University, and Carnegie Mellon University. Paul and his wife, Linda, a violinist and former orchestra director in the Mount Lebanon School District, have three children, Sarah, David, and Jeremy. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to have you welcome Paul, 1 second here, to the stage. There he is. Hey, Paul, how are you today?
Good morning, Vito. Good evening. Sorry. I'm doing wonderfully. I'm happy to be here. Listening to your excerpts of your symphony brought back a lot of fun and warm recollections for me. When I first heard the piece, I was taken with how melodic it was and how dramatic. And even though it evoked certain other composers like Respighi and Ennio Morricone, it was entirely original. And I really got excited hearing it. I loved the drama, and I loved that fugue in the second movement. That I could play. I'm not a whistler, but I went around the house singing that and waking up from a nap thinking, singing that motive. So I really enjoyed working on your piece, and I hope more and more people get to hear it.
Well, thank you. And believe me, I was honored that you agreed to help me and to work on it. And so I think it was a great collaboration, and we've become very good friends as a result as well. Which
Agreed.
is equally important. So, Paul, I have my first question for you is, when did you begin studying music, and what was your first instrument, and what was your inspiration to start a musical instrument?
Well, I began with piano lessons, as did my two brothers, Dan and Josh, in second grade, which was what my parents suggested. We had always had a piano in the house, and my mother played the piano and was a great singer and whistler and knew every song and every classical piece of music. And when you would play a melody, she would either whistle or sing the harmony or the counter melody, and seemed to know, as if she'd studied the scores, which she never did. It was kind of amazing. So there, we started with piano. I began to take violin lessons in fourth grade in school, and began then shortly thereafter to take private lessons.
Okay.
We had an orchestra in our elementary school, and didn't practice a lot, but was, but plugged away. I should say that, though, the genesis, I think, of our passion for music was in our genes. When we were young, my youngest memories are of listening to music either from the record player or the radio, and always moving around the house. We had a hardwood floor, and my mom would love to take us, even when we were little, and dance with us in the living room. So I remember moving around a lot, and we had music of all sorts, from Odetta, Pete Seeger, Theodore Bickel, to Dizzy Gillespie and John Coltrane, and all sorts of classical music and everything in between, gospel. And of course, there was a strong influence of the Yiddish language in my family. That was my parents' first language when they were born in the United States, but before they got to kindergarten, they spoke Yiddish in their houses. And so there was a lot of Yiddish and Jewish music as well. So there was always dance and music and movement. And I think it was a natural for us to certainly start musical instruments. And then, now that I think of it, my brother Dan and I both became professional musicians. It was probably a fairly natural course to pursue that, and we were both lucky enough to end up making our livings from music.
Speaking of Dan, and he helped me a bit too with the symphony. We reached out to Dan a couple of times on clarinet things, because he was, of course, a clarinetist. I want to show you this picture, and it's really two pictures. You and your brothers, about 50 years apart. Is that right?
It's exactly 50 years apart. The picture on the left, actually. So that's Dan on the left, our youngest brother Joshua, or Josh, in the middle, and me on the right. This was taken the day of my high school senior solo, where I played two movements of the Handel viola concerto, and my brother Dan on the left conducted the high school orchestra.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And Josh was there. He was 5 years younger than Dan. And the picture on the right was us exactly 50 years later. So this was done in May, well, even a few months later. That was May 1974 on the left, and this was in Philadelphia late last year, 2024. So 50 years apart. We're in the same order, and that's a wonderful combination there.
Yes. You mentioned about starting with piano and then to violin. When did you start playing viola, or switch to viola, should I say?
Well, that's really when my passion sort of took off. I had a good violin teacher named Wilbur Turner for 5 years, and then I switched to a man who was a Cleveland Orchestra member named Leonard Samuels for my 9th grade year. And he was one of these just wonderful people. He would we would pick us up and take my brother and I to Cleveland Orchestra concerts on Friday nights.
Oh, wow.
And so after the concert, we'd wait around the locker room area of Severance Hall, where the Cleveland Orchestra played, and he would bring us back home. And we had a chance to talk with a real live professional musician about music. And he was the kind of person, like many people I've met in my life and been lucky enough to been influenced by, who treated everybody the same. So if you were, a young violinist who couldn't put more than four notes together. He talked to you as if you were, a concert artist. He wouldn't talk down to anybody. He would describe the music, and he was very interested in what we thought. And so he was sort of an iconic figure in our lives, my brother Dan's and mine. But by that time, I had thought about switching to viola. It seemed to be a natural. I had played it in a little bit in a string quartet in junior high, and it seemed to fit me better.
Okay.
So with his blessing as well, I switched to the viola in 10th grade and started studying immediately with a wonderful player, the assistant principal viola of the Cleveland Orchestra, Edward Ormond. And I had 3 amazing years with him. And once I started to play viola in the high school orchestra, because of my violin background, I was a little more advanced than a few other people, and I was the first viola in the orchestra. So I caught the attention of violinists in the orchestra who wanted to play chamber music. And there were a number of very good players who went to string quartet camps in the summer and really played a lot. So I fell in with this crowd of playing chamber music. And it's sort of like when you play tennis with someone who's a lot better than you, but they always return the ball. So it keeps the motion going, and I think you improve, or you're forced to improve faster than you would be if you were playing with someone at your own level. And I pretty much immediately became smitten. Played all the string quartets of the classic string quartets, Haydn, Mozart, Mendelssohn, Beethoven, Brahms. And even though I couldn't play some of it, I got exposed to a tremendous amount. Went to a string quartet camp called the Quartet Program in New York, and spent my summers there practicing. And by the end of 10th grade, I thought, gee, I would love to try to make this my life. And I was lucky enough to have really great instruction and play with a lot of great people. And so it was the path that I took that turned out to be the right path.
That's right. And you used the word exposed. And I when you mentioned about this teacher taking you to the Cleveland Symphony, I mean, the exposure is so important, because if you don't get that exposure, if you don't have that experience, you don't know it exists as a child, as a young person, And so to me, that's so important. And so a very important part of your journey is to get the exposure to know, oh, this is what I aspire to be or to get to, and that's a really, really important part of it all.
Exactly. My brother Dan, I should just add, was equally focused at his age, and we shared a bedroom in the house all our lives. So we sort of our interest fed off of each other, which I think also sort of accelerated our interest and our wishes to try to make music, to major in music in college and beyond.
And I have a little couple excerpts with you playing with Dan. I'd like to play that. Can I do that? Do you want to give any commentary before?
Sure. I should just say Dan's a clarinetist. Of course, I'm a violist, and there are several famous trios in the classical canon of chamber music for clarinet, viola, and piano. And one, of course, is a Mozart trio called the Kegelstatt, which Kegel means bowling in German, and it's a piece that supposedly Mozart composed while he was sitting in a tavern and having a beer and playing the tabletop version of bowling, where you swing a ball and it knocks over pins. And he also had a muse, a great clarinetist named Anton Stadler, who he wrote three of his greatest pieces: this trio, the clarinet quintet, and the clarinet concerto. And so that's one piece. Actually, we're not going to hear that one. We're going to hear the other two well-known ones. The trio by Schumann. We'll hear an excerpt of the fourth movement, sorry. And then one of the 8 pieces for viola, clarinet, and piano by Max Bruch. And these two pieces are beautiful and fun to play. And my brother Dan and I have played them from our high school days, so the mid 1970s, early 1970s, up until a couple years ago. We've played these pieces together in various places around the world, including Hong Kong, where Dan was the principal clarinet for 8 or 9 years. The Schumann excerpt is kind of craggy and rough and kind of like a ping pong match back and forth. The Bruch is one of those beautiful melodious harmonic pieces where you hear a little bit, you hear how the viola, the clarinet, and the middle range of the piano all operate in the same general range of color and sonority, and is just a beautiful piece to play.
Good.
So I hope you enjoy these two short excerpts.
Let's play them. Let's play them. Good. Okay. There you go. Good.
I'm smiling because the recording techniques have come so far. This was from the early 1990s, and it's a rehearsal, I think, that we did recorded on a Sony Walkman cassette tape. So it was a bit. It sounds a little bit wobbly today, but still gives me good memories.
Good, good. So I know that before you came to Pittsburgh in 1981, you played for a year with Detroit Symphony. You want to tell us a little bit about that, and then coming to Pittsburgh?
Sure. So my senior year at the Eastman School of Music, I got to play extra viola in the Rochester Philharmonic, which was my first real professional orchestra experience, which was wonderful under David Zinman. Then I went to graduate school at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and one of the first auditions I took a few before that, was for the Detroit Symphony. And I was lucky enough to get into the orchestra. The orchestra had 10 violas in their viola section for decades, and they decided to add a sixth stand of violas, meaning two players. So there were two openings.
Okay.
And I auditioned, and at the end of a long day and night, they offered me a job. And as it turned out, a friend of mine named Glenn Mello, who is still playing in the Detroit Symphony, got the other job. He was coming from the Indiana School of Music at that point. Our conductor was Antal Dorati, who was a phenomenal musician. At that point, he was an older man who had led orchestras all over the world for decades and decades. And he had come to Detroit at a time where he helped jumpstart the stature and ensure the quality of the orchestra. It was a wonderful orchestra with great players, but he brought a kind of a panache and a world-class recognition to the orchestra that had waxed for a while and waned. And we had one year, and I remember the first concert. He was one of these men who was not rumored. In his early days, he had a bit of a temper. He was a little bit of a maestro.
Oh, yeah.
But at this point in his life, he was he was calmer and more, kind of had done it all and was enjoying imparting his wisdom and experience of nearly half a century to the orchestra. And our first concert, we started with the El Salón Mexico, this wonderful piece by Aaron Copland, which has a great E-flat clarinet solo. And he was not a great maestro, in terms of his conducting. There are other people, we'll talk about Lauren Mazel, for example, who had such precision with his hands that he never had to talk. If you watched him, you knew where to play and what he wanted. Dorati was someone who had great rhythm, but sort of started like, he would just sort of start like this. And I remember Linda coming to the opening concert, and we started, and the piece is very bright and clear, and the whole orchestra is playing articulated, and he just sort of went like that. But the orchestra nailed it, and it was fantastic. It was together and bright and aggressive and all the right things for the music. And I remember Linda at the end of the evening saying, how the heck did the orchestra know where to come in with him? But he really was a great conductor. There was one little thing that happened. So after a couple weeks or a couple months, there's a process, a tenure process. And one of the elements is to sit. I was a section player, so I sat in the back of the orchestra. One of the parts of the process is to sit on the first stand of your section. So I was on the first stand of violas next to my esteemed principal viola, Nathan Gordon. And I had to play a rehearsal, and it was right under Dorati's nose. And we played Beethoven's Fifth, and there's a spot in the first movement where there's a rest where no one's playing that is longer than you expect, and it's a dramatic rest. And I knew the music inside out. I'd never done this before. Of course, I came in the rest. I was the only person. And I thought, oh boy, I've just blown my chance at tenure with the orchestra. And Dorati looked down at me, and he smiled and says, that's okay. That happens sometimes. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, I'll be okay. Nice. I felt embarrassed, obviously, because it was the trap that you absolutely should not fall into. It's like being an offensive guard on the football team in the end of the Super Bowl, and a flag is thrown because you're holding, and you almost cost the team the win. But thankfully, I didn't cost our orchestra the win, and they kept me on. So, but at the end of the year, I auditioned for the Pittsburgh Symphony. I also auditioned that year for the Cleveland Orchestra, like a week or two before, because it was home, and I had worked hard. And the orchestra, the one in Cleveland, didn't go very well. I think I was too nervous. I knew everybody there, and I wasn't ready, I guess. But a week later, Pittsburgh was open, and I thought, I want to try again. And I got lucky and came to Pittsburgh, and that was 1981, and been here ever since.
Awesome. That's beautiful. I love it. And I know you've had, well, the career that you've had to have so many highlights in your career, tours that you did. I know the Soviet Union. I want you to tell me about that. In fact, I want to show you a picture right here. I want you to tell me about this one.
Wow. Okay. So this is a picture from 1989. Okay. That's me on the left with a little more hair and less wrinkles and darker hair. Yeah, a little more hair and darker. Next to me, all the standing people in a row are Isaiah Selkowitz, our associate principal viola, who is also retired. And then our first stand of violins. The next man is Mark Huggins, who I went to Eastman with. And he was the associate concertmaster of the orchestra. And then next to him is Andres Cardenas, who was our concertmaster for about half the time that I was in the orchestra. and also a professor of violin at CMU, and also my daughter's teachers. My daughter Sarah's violin teacher at Carnegie Mellon. The seated member, because he's a cellist too, is Mike Lippman, also a dear friend. And Mike and I and Mark Huggins all went to Eastman at the same time. And this was a tour that began in the end of the summer of 1989, and began with 2 concerts in the then Soviet Union. First, we went to Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, and then we went to Moscow, and then we went to Warsaw, and then we went through places in Europe that we'd been before a number of times. One of the things the orchestra likes to talk about is that about a month and a half later, the Berlin Wall fell, and the Soviet Union began to dissolve. And we'd like to think that the orchestra's visit had a role in loosening those bonds so that the people of those countries could experience more freedom. The thing that picture was taken for was a wonderful experience that we had that was not on the stage of the concerts in the Soviet Union, but in Moscow, we had arranged to play a chamber music concert at a newly opened Jewish cultural center. And this was a big deal because during Stalin's time, all those religious centers and all the Jewish centers were closed. And this was a newly opened art center, Jewish art center. And they had told us that this was the first one since Stalin had closed them, which of course was decades before. Sure. It turns out that we went to a theater to rehearse, and the theater was really cold, but that was fine. And they were having some technical problems and leaking and everything. So at the last minute, the concert, which was the next day, was moved to a large kind of empty section of an apartment building. And we played for about 70 people who crowded in to this very small room and played music that had some kind of Jewish connection. We played the Mendelssohn Viola Quintet. Felix Mendelssohn, of course, his grandfather was famous for having been Jewish, but then like a lot of people in Europe in trying and difficult times had publicly converted away from Judaism, like Mahler did later, to be accepted by the establishment and be able to get to the highest levels of the music making in their societies. But I also arranged some Yiddish folk songs, which everybody knew, for the string quartet. And the only person who's not in that picture who played in that concert was Patricia Prattis Jennings, our principal keyboard player for many, many decades. And it was a wonderful day because we felt like we were touching people. And the minute we started playing, there were sighs and cries, and it was a wonderful experience. And when we met the man who was leading us over there, I said hello to them. He clearly didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Russian. So he asked me in Yiddish, "Do you speak Yiddish?" And I said, yes. So we walked for about a half an hour from this theater to where the new venue for this concert, and spoke in Yiddish. And I thought, boy, my Yiddish is really coming in handy in Moscow. Who would have known that? So that was just an amazing day for us personally, because we really felt connected in a way that's different a little bit than even a great symphony concert, where when the audience goes nuts, you feel that connection, and it's a high that you can't replace. But this was a more kind of intimate feeling of that. And I've had all my colleagues come up to me in that picture at various times in our lives many years later and say that was just a wonderful, very meaningful day.
Yeah, so that's beautiful. Yeah.
The audiences, I wanted to talk a little about audiences in all over the world, because one of the highlights, obviously, of playing in the orchestra was the amount of touring that we were lucky enough to do. And in the Soviet Union, you had a sense that the people were hungry for music in a way that seemed almost desperate. And here we were an American orchestra, and so that had a certain amount of interest. Lauren Mizell was a very famous man in the field. We also, on that tour, had James Galway with us, the flute player.
Sure.
And we played and also Elmar Oliveira, a wonderful violinist, who was the first American to win a gold medal at the Tchaikovsky competition in the violin. And we played a lot of American music and some European classics, but they were just hungry for the new music and for the experience. Moscow, we played in the great hall of the conservatory, which was where Elmar Oliveira had won the competition, the Tchaikovsky competition. Played the Barber Violin Concerto, which has a very demonic and virtuosic last movement that goes very fast, very difficult to play. And he played at the speed that Mario Andretti won his first Indy 500. I mean, it was amazing, and the audience just went totally nuts. But the most moving element for me was in Leningrad. We played in the famous hall called the Hall of 1,000 Columns. And when you walk out on halls in Europe, particularly, you're very aware that a lot of them, the old halls, you look at the floor, and the floors look generally very old. And on the side of the stage where the violas usually play is nearby, or where cellos often play. And of course, every cellist has an end pin, and they stick it into the wood, really push it in so that they're secure when they play.
Sure.
And I'm looking at this floor, which is pockmarked and wood, but different colors and lots of holes and everything. And as we started to play, my reaction always is, when I go into a hall like that, I think, who has walked on this floor before? Mm-hmm. Great musicians, normal people, a regular violist. And during the concert, I began to think, even though I tried to keep my mind on the music, about the siege of Leningrad in World War II. And there are recordings where you can hear bombs and artillery that the Nazis were launching over the Neva River, to put Leningrad keep Leningrad under siege. And you imagine a violist was sitting in my chair with his feet on the same spots that the floor that I'm on. He hadn't eaten in a week. His family was starving, and he had braved whatever was going on outside, artillery shells, to come and do his normal life, which was to play music.
Right.
And that, I thought, two things. I thought, wow, that's amazing that I'm somehow connected to that. And the other thing you get when you travel anywhere is the perspective of how fortunate you are, how lucky you are. And that was a really thrilling week to do that. And then that was culminated the first week by our first trip to Warsaw. And in Warsaw, Warsaw was already more modern and updated than the Soviet Union was. It was just ahead of the curve. Each Soviet country, as the Iron Curtain dropped, developed at a different pace in terms of new building and a better economy and more consumer goods, more color, et cetera. Even though the art and architecture is as good as anywhere in the world or better, those other things were clearly lacking to somebody who's used to a bountiful country like America. And Warsaw, the concert hall had been rebuilt because it was utterly destroyed during the World War II. And it was a small shoebox hall, which is sort of like the famous hall in Vienna that I'll mention later. And so really good acoustic. And we were doing Mahler's Seventh Symphony with Mizell. And the stage was very short. So we were sort of crammed in, a little like sardines. And we're used to always insisting on all this room. And of course, if you're an upper string player, you want more room because of where your left arm is with the instrument, and your bow, and the ability to move around. You need more room even than a cellist, I think, but certainly more room than a clarinetist or a horn player or a flute player. And so we are great at complaining when we don't have enough room. But this was an amazing hall. So those concerts started, and right before the concert started, a hush went around the orchestra, because looking up in the balcony, that kind of this horseshoe that came around, very close to the stage were two people who looked familiar singing together on the upper level. And we looked up and we realized it was Penderecki, the famous Polish composer, and Witold Lutosławski, the other famous Polish composer. So if we were 100 years before, that would be like seeing Brahms and Tchaikovsky sing together, hearing the Pittsburgh Symphony.
Sure.
So everyone, and we had just played, we played a lot of music by them, and that sort of got us thrilled, you know, two famous people listening to the orchestra. Anyways, the Mahler performance that night, the Mahler 7th, was one of my top 10 highlights in the orchestra, as far as the combining of a really good concert technically with what is ultimately more important, which is how the music comes out. Those two combined with the audience, who went nuts, and the fact that Lutosławski, these two iconic people, royalty, were in the hall and responding with an excited applause like the audience, was an amazing night. And it was capped off by, when I got dressed in the locker room and came up to the street level to go back to the hotel, who should pass me going down to his dressing room but Lorin Maazel. And Lorin Maazel was an amazing genius conductor. He was not generally known to be warm and fuzzy. He was more of he wanted to keep his role as maestro separate. He thought maybe that was the way to earn respect and keep respect from the musicians. And he was also very focused on what he was doing. So he wasn't the kind of person who looks you in the eye and smiles and his eyes are twinkling usually. But as we walked by, our eyes met, and he grabbed my arm. It's very uncharacteristic, and like this. And he went, "Wasn't that an amazing concert?"
Oh, wow.
And he said it the way my father would say it, or we would say it to each other, and you know, in the dressing room afterwards, saying, "Wow, that was great." And so that was my memory of Warsaw, and it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't in the symphony, and if we had not played this really compelling, great performance of great music, the Mahler 7th Symphony.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I know that you played under Leonard Bernstein once or twice. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it was only once. So Bernstein came to Pittsburgh, I think in like 1940s. I should know the date, 43 maybe, as a last minute substitute to conduct. And he conducted the program to great acclaim. And of course, this is what happened with him in the New York Philharmonic. He went on at the last minute and was amazing as a really young man. And that launched his career. So he came to Pittsburgh in the 1980s to do this, essentially the same repertoire, replicate the same concert repertoire that he had done 40 years before.
I see.
And he, of course, was an older man and very iconic. And, you know, he's what's the word they use for like great sports people? The Q rating of somebody is how well they're known across all different spectrum, the whole spectrum of society. And Bernstein had a Q rating like, you know, like the Pope and Elvis. I mean, everybody yeah. knew.
Of course.
So I was really excited. I hadn't had the opportunity, as my brother had and other people who went to Tanglewood, to work with him when I was a student. So he came in. The first piece we did was the Leonore Overture by Beethoven, Leonore number 3. And Bernstein was somebody who was also very interesting as far as his conducting. I wouldn't say that he had the most precise hands, certainly not like a Maazel, but what he had were the two essentials that you want, which is music just poured out of him, and he had an incredible sense of rhythm and timing. And so The overture starts with a slow introduction, and then it starts with dee da da dee da 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 dum, and there's a viola underpinning, which is the eighth notes going da 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 dee da ba da 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 ba da 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 da. So we have to play our open C, which is the most wobbly note on our instrument, and we have to play it with precision and a kind of a tightness of character so that it's very clear and very driving. And it has to be persistently there, but it shouldn't overwhelm any of the other music. It's like an annoying fly that comes by and you hear the buzzing and you're aware of it, but it's not taking over everything else. So he looked to us and he started this, and we have to start very cold. So we just have to go, and it's always difficult, even with a very precise conductor. So he did his gesture, which you wouldn't call terribly precise. And the viola section played this perfectly together. I have no idea how it happened, but it's Bernstein that did it. And as I'm playing it, we're going diddle, diddle, diddle. He's looking, and I feel like he's looking right at me. He's looking and he smiles and he's engaged and he's saying, we're doing this together. I know what you have to play. I know it's hard, and thank you for doing it. And isn't this fun? Though all those feelings came through me. So at the first break, I'm talking to my stand partner and I said, that's amazing. It felt like he was looking right at me. And she looked at me and she said, I had the same feeling. He was looking at me. And everybody felt the same way. So he was engaged in a way that was personal, to the service of the music, that was just thrilling. And we did a great performance of the Firebird Suite by Stravinsky with all the amazing orchestra colors. So that was a real thrill. As far as if I want to recap in 1 minute, my other great highlights in the orchestra, well, touring provided a tremendous opportunity. Of course, we played in Vienna, where the Musikverein, the famous hall where Brahms stood on the stage and conducted, and people before him. We've gotten to play there numerous times under all of our conductors, which was really thrilling. The playing in Berlin at the new hall, the Philharmonie, which is right up against where the Berlin Wall was. East Germany's right across the field. And playing in Lucerne at the festival in Salzburg was great. One of my highlights in Vienna, and I had them with all the conductors, but one in particular I remember was with Maris Janssens, our Latvian-born music director, whose father, Arvid, was a very famous conductor too. Unfortunately, they both died of heart disease issues very early, young in their life. Janssens, at that point, when we would tour, we would typically go for one night to a hall, then bus or train to another hall. And in the course of a 3-week tour, we would play about usually 3 or 4 different programs, where there was a main symphony, an overture, and a concerto featuring a soloist. And there would be different soloists. So there were maybe 12 pieces that we would take, 10 or 12. And then we'd have a variety of encores as well. And with Janssens on this one tour, the orchestra tried we had these mini residencies, a different format. So we would be in a city 3 nights and we would play 3 different concerts. And we did this format a couple times. Once we played the 3 big Stravinsky tone poems, the Petrushka, Firebird, and the Rite of Spring. And that one, we would do one each night and then fill it out with other programs. So a community could come and hear the orchestra, this foreign orchestra, play 3 nights in a row, 3 different things. But we also did it with classics of other composers. And in Vienna, in a 3-night span, we played as the main piece on each concert, a Bruckner Symphony, Bruckner's 7th Symphony, the Eroica Symphony, Beethoven's 3rd Symphony, and Shostakovich 10th Symphony. And when you go to Vienna, and you go to play the European classical canon of music, some people view it as a little bit like taking coals to Newcastle. It's hard to impress the Viennese because they feel that that's their music. And we played 3 great concerts in a row with Bruckner and Beethoven, which is hard to please the audience. The critics weren't always wild, but we knew that it was good. The audiences went berserk, which was fun. And then we played Shostakovich 10th, which is a big dramatic piece, which conjures up the terror of Stalin in Russia. So there's a lot of almost demonic places where the strings and the brass are playing in a violent way. It's very dramatic, very exciting music, and it's very loud too. So that we played at a volume level that was big for the Musikverein, which is this smaller hall. And when you're playing the classics, you don't want to overplay. You want it to fit in. But this was a time where we could show that we had this big hot rod of an orchestra, and we could use it not only in a refined way for Bruckner and for Beethoven, but in a full way for this violent, more modern music. And they loved that too. So I remember those kinds of concerts. Got to go all over the world, in Asia, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, China several times, which was interesting over the decades to see how China had developed. And we went to Japan a number of times, and that's a unique place that is wonderful to visit. And the audiences love their music. They're more reserved than the Europeans. They clap more politely, but that was also incredible. The last thing that I'll talk about was the European, the audiences everywhere clap differently. We played in an outdoor arena in a Greek theater in Patras, Greece. And as an encore, we played a piece called Yerakina, a typical Greek melody. So, and in the Balkans, the music is not, it's not John Philip Sousa, dum, bum, ba-dum, bum, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's, or 1, 2, 1, 2. It's compound meters. So this piece had a 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, all the way through it. So it's something the orchestra took a little while to get used to when we rehearsed, because it's not what we didn't grow up with that. It's not in our blood right away, or not most people. And as soon as we started it, there were some people I heard singing, but immediately when we got to the first chorus, the whole audience, and this was in a big round arena, started to go yuppa puppa yuppa puppa yuppa puppa, and they played together at least as well as the Pittsburgh Symphony did. It was amazing how the audience clapped. In Budapest, they had that kind of clapping, and something that we never heard in the United States, but in Europe we always heard on tours, which was the clapping that starts like this, just general clapping, and then somehow would take over going like this, and then the whole audience would come to doing this, and then it would get faster and faster and faster, and then dissolve into regular applause. And that was something that was really fun. And that would happen, and then we'd come out and do another encore, and it would start again and again. And sometimes this love fest happened, went on for about a half hour. The only problem with that is that when you finally finish, you're so excited and everything, you end up going out and staying out too late and eating and having one too many beers in Munich. But
that's okay. Good celebration.
That's sort of like you need to sort of come down from it.
Yeah.
But the touring was thrilling. I should say that the best experience, though, when we came home, was when we had a really great concert in Heinz Hall. The audiences loved it. We loved it, and we recognized people in the audience. So we're both looking at each other when they're applauding, and we're smiling. And then when you pack up your instrument and you change out of your tails and you walk down Penn Avenue, everybody that you've been looking at in the hall is walking to their car like you are, and you have that communion, and that was wonderful. That meant home was really great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Beautiful, amazing stories, Paul. Amazing career. Thank you. You did mention to me about some non-orchestral opportunities within the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. And we have a chamber music, a couple excerpts we want to play. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. Well, you're going to hear again from a cassette tape, but something that we played on a stage of Heinz Hall with an orchestra-sponsored chamber music concert is several excerpts from the Serenade by Dochnányi, a Hungarian composer. It's for string trio. It features Mike Lippman, who you saw in that picture from the Soviet Union, and myself, and one of our other great violinists, the third chair, assistant concertmaster, Hui Shen Kao. And you'll hear these three brief excerpts, and please enjoy.
Okay, let's play it.
That was fun to play.
I bet. Yeah, that was amazing. How quick, how fast you guys were playing that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that now. So
Yeah. Well, it's okay.
you talked a little about, we were talking a little bit about opportunities from the Pittsburgh Symphony that were not on the stage, and playing chamber music and going to schools to play in small groups was something that we did a lot of, that the whole orchestra does, which I think is really helpful for any person to go out and play and interact with different people with different experiences and different ages. And we always admired the music teachers who were working every day with the students. We got to come in and sort of be the color person in the football broadcast. That we weren't doing the play-by-play, but we would play and hopefully augment what the programs and the teachers were doing. Two other things that the symphony did a lot of, it developed a music and wellness program that really was, the person responsible for that primarily was one of my viola colleagues, Penny Brill. And what it did was harness the the playing ability of the musicians to go into various settings and help professionals who were leading support groups, cancer support groups, help the music therapists who were working with patients at Children's Hospital or at senior centers or at regular hospitals. And the one difference between that kind of playing and the playing that most classically trained musicians are comfortable and used to is that when you go to play a Mozart sonata at a recital, you're focused solely on the Mozart and performing, and you want the audience to just sit there and listen. You hope that the interaction is emotional and connective, and often it is. But when you're playing in settings like hospitals, you have to play what the patient needs. For example, we would play when a young child had to have a procedure like a new central line put in to deliver chemotherapy. And it's something that they knew how to do quickly, but was not comfortable. So the idea was for the music therapist to play and interact with some kind of music to distract the patient and to keep them calm. So if I went in and decided I was going to help the music therapist and I went bum, 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 that'd be totally wrong, right? The heart rate would go up, their blood pressure would go up, they'd start to move around while they're using sharp instruments on the patient. So we had to not only listen to the music therapist and take all our guidance and imagine we knew nothing, which we really did, and then learn, but provide something that was helpful. And music more and more is being seen as something that can be therapeutic for everyone. You know, the dramatic photos you see of Parkinson's patients who can't move a certain way. And then when you play a tune that they recognize that might trigger something from 40 years before, they can dance, they can move, all things magically disappear. That's sort of the miraculous stuff that does happen some, but often music is something that just seeps in and helps calm people. We know from experience that the neural pathways that music travels on are the same ones that pain receptors travel on. So it's when music can take the place of pain, that's a great thing. Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing. Yeah, absolutely.
And I have to put in one word for the early childhood initiatives, which was playing not only for schools, but preschools and nurseries. And I had a great experience at the Syart Center, which is affiliated with Carnegie Mellon University, playing for toddlers,
Yeah.
3-month-olds. And I had to learn to sometimes just put the viola down and play and sing the Itsy Bitsy Spider, but then try to let them play the viola and pluck. And it was remarkable how much I learned from those small children. So that was another great opportunity that I had.
Yeah, that's
I wouldn't have had otherwise.
I know too that we talked about your daughter Sarah, who is quite an accomplished violinist, and you did some touring with her with the symphony. She played with the Pittsburgh Symphony occasionally, and I have several pictures. And as we look at this here, I'm going to show you this picture here.
So this series of pictures we're going to see are from the last several European tours I made to Europe. We played in Berlin and Vienna and Lucerne and many other places. And this is a concert at one of those. So it would have been either 2014 or 16 or 17. And this is in Berlin because we were being broadcast all around the world and had a special audience in Heinz Hall that was viewing the concert, much like you go to the Met concerts at your local movie theater. And so this is Manfred Honeck with a terrible towel to sort of show and cement the connection with Pittsburgh. Hey, we love you. We know you're home watching us. Here's a terrible towel. So that was fun.
That's cool. Yeah.
And of course, you can see me in sort of in the middle there.
Right there in the
old bald guy with the gray hair.
This
is one of the same tours, I think 2016. And we talked about Sarah playing in the orchestra, which was a thrill for any parent to share that kind of experience with their child. And my stand partner is a wonderful violist named Josh Kelly, who is the son of Randy Kelly, our longtime principal viola, now retired. And I got to share a stand with him during one of those tours, which was a really nice experience.
Nice.
This is my daughter, Sarah, and me in the Musikverein. You can tell the hall because of all the gold and the gilt, which is
Wow,
very
it's
dramatic.
gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And this is 2016. So this is my penultimate tour. And we decided to take some pictures. And this is a picture, I believe, in Berlin. And you can actually see Sarah. She's to the right in the back, sort of, if you go from that trumpet player standing at the back on the right, under the overhang, and just go forward, the girl with long hair right there is Sarah. And
Yeah,
then
look left. Yeah, I see her. Yeah.
I'm in there too, in the middle. And it was that was just a fun experience.
Yeah.
Aha. So this was a really fun time. So the concerts in Vienna, after one of the concerts, Manfred Honeck took the whole orchestra out to the Vienna Woods, Tale of the Vienna Woods, which is the area outside of Vienna where the foothills of the mountains start. And this is a famous place for wine and the new wines that come out in the every year. And it was a wine garden, and we took a picture there. And that was a funny time too, because at the reception, I came up to just give a toast to Manfred for throwing this party and taking us on this great musical tour.
Wow.
And then he asked me jokingly if I would translate because he wanted to speak in German. And I understand a little, but not a lot. And so when he started to talk, all I could think of was to tell the audience that Manfred's very happy you're here, but he apologizes because the kitchen has run out of food and the bar has no more wine. And the orchestra laughed, which was good. And then he smiled at me. He was somebody who could take a joke, which was really nice. So Sarah and I got to share that whole experience. And a lot of people in the orchestra knew Sarah because their kids knew Sarah and they knew her from when she was a baby. So that was a thrill. This is the final picture. This is my last concert in the Musikverein. And when I ended the concert, I hadn't really thought about it. And then we sat down after the last bow. I just sat for a minute and said, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be here again. This is my last time. And I've gotten to play in this hall maybe 20 times over 40 years, because the last time I played there the first time was with Previn in the early 80s. And Sarah saw me and I started to cry a little. She came over, she said, you okay? And I said, yeah, this is going to be the last time. And so she gave me a hug and she said, let's take a picture. So she asked somebody to take a picture.
That's beautiful. Wonderful. And, Paul, you've had such an amazing career. I love hearing the stories and the depth of your musical experience and talent. It's amazing. I really appreciate you sharing all this with us today. And I'd like to end our day with, I have a little excerpt. I believe it was in Lucerne of the Pittsburgh playing the Tchaikovsky Sixth. This is the end of the third movement, which is a pretty exciting moment in the symphony.
Right. This is one of those pieces that there are many of them in the orchestra literature where you have to have a great orchestra to play and a big orchestra. And when it sounds good and exciting, there's nothing in the world that can replicate what that experience is like. And we got to play this piece a lot, and it was always fun, and you could tell the audience was ready to roar at the end of the concert. So yeah, it's a great way to end our podcast together.
Let's listen to it.
Okay. Yeah,
Wow.
got goosebumps still. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's amazing. Wow, what a beautiful piece too. Paul, it's been wonderful having you on the show, and I hope the audience appreciate it as much as I did. I'm sure they do. Just wonderful, and thank you so much for being my guest here today. And thank you for everything you did for me for my symphony and editing it. I so appreciate your orchestral experience putting that to my work, and that was wonderful. And thank you for all that too.
Thank you, Vito. I should say I learned a tremendous amount working on your piece and working with you. You have a level of experience in many areas that I don't know, and I appreciate. And I learned a lot about collaborating and about a symphony, and I was grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and we should do this informally again so I can tell you. I have a lot of stories I didn't tell. So thank you so much for this time, and be well. Thanks.
You too, Paul. Take care. All right. Well, there you have another episode of Memories of a Musician. And looking forward, we have next week another classical musician. I consider Marino Galuzzo a classical musician. He's a saxophonist. Marino and I were at Duquesne University School of Music all 4 years together, played in the symphonic band together, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, he was the founder, one of the founders anyways, of the Three Rivers Saxophone Quartet, which they invited me, commissioned me to compose a piece for their 50th anniversary concert, which was just, I think, 2 years ago. And so Marino is going to be our guest next week. So be sure to tune in to hear another great musician's journey. And I think it's just so interesting. All of these musicians that we're getting to hear of the journey is so important. And I hope that younger musicians tune in and hear, what it takes and how you get there. And it's never an easy thing. So I just, it's really, to me, I think the program has a lot of value to all the listeners, but particularly young people that want to pursue music as a career. So anyhow, let's call it a day, and thank you for tuning in. And we will look forward to seeing you next week.